It's so interesting that in this present culture, where some of the loudest religious voices, the ones that dominate the airways, let me reframe that. I feel like I need to spend a lot of time either challenging some of those voices, but at the same time challenging some of the voices that we have carried through the tradition. This morning we're going to look at wisdom. Within the Judaic Christian tradition, wisdom was a woman. We're going to read a passage from Proverbs that speaks about Lady Wisdom standing in the middle of the marketplace and wanting everyone's attention. It is so unfortunate that both the Judaic tradition and then the Christian tradition managed to kind of sweep under the carpet any elements of the feminine energy and consciousness within the Godhead. So this is what they did instead. They took Lady Wisdom, who in the earliest theological musings of this tradition was in some ways a consort of such to the male god, all right? So within the earliest understandings of the mystery we call God in our tradition, there was both male and female. And the female element brought the wisdom. What the church did with that is they then said, all right, we really need to, all that women power, we're not comfortable with that. But we'll just let the Holy Spirit then represent the feminine and the divine. But you can see how we really watered it down in the meantime. So it's interesting, so that's a little introduction to the passage from Proverbs, where at that point they were still allowing Lady Wisdom to stand strong and proud and female and feisty. Within the earliest parts of the Christian tradition, there was a deep sense that Jesus was in fact an embodiment of that female wisdom energy. And very often, Jesus was understood as being an incarnation of Sophia. So Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. So we'll just be thinking about that a bit this morning. And thus, some of the more female images of the divine. From Proverbs 8. Does not wisdom call? And does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way at the crossroads she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town to the entrance of the portal she cries out. To you, O people, I call, and my cry is to all that live. O simple ones, learn prudence. Acquire intelligence, you who lack it. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They are all straight to one who understands and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. And then a few verses from Matthew's chapter. Rather than choosing any specific wisdom sayings, I thought I would choose a passage where I think Jesus is saying that, look, we have choices on how we live our life. There are at least a couple of paths ahead of us. The decisions that we make, the principles on which we choose to live our life will have consequences. So choose carefully. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock, or good wisdom. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell. And great was its fall. Bishop Jack Spong argues in his book, Jesus for the Non-Religious, that the unique thing about Jesus was that his real humanity came to be viewed as the vehicle through which God entered the life of this world. His real humanity. So let me recap a little. Jesus was a Jew, not a Christian, not even the first Christian. He never rejected his Jewish roots. Neither did he set out to establish a new religion, appoint clergy, or call a committee meeting. As a wandering Galilean sage, he belonged more to the wisdom stream than to the priestly stream of Judaism, which means that his ministry was more of an embodiment of the female persona in the Godhead, known as Sophia, the word that means wisdom in Greek. Now, we know that the Church of Christendom had a massive delete button when it came to female wisdom, female leadership, and female images of God. And so, what was left after all the men made the decisions was the Holy Spirit that was a feminine noun. But within the Judaic tradition, the wisdom element of the divine was female. And this wisdom, this feminine spirit, worked in partnership with the male persona in the divine. Now remember, we're talking about the mystery we call God. And so we are always only speaking in metaphor, because that is the only doorway to begin to understand that mystery. We know that when we read the Gospels carefully, that Jesus is less about power, unless it was healing power, and more about wisdom. And so in the early church, he was known by some as the personification of Sophia, who was known by some as the goddess of wisdom. So let me make one more comment here. As Judaism wrestled with its identity, it also wrestled with polytheism. Most of the other ancient spiritual traditions had no problem with the idea of more than one God, and certainly had no problem with gods who were male and gods who were female. Judaism, in its attempt to consolidate power and purpose, eliminated polytheism, and at the same time, any tradition that might include a vision of God that was anything but male. Anyway, this very male-dominated culture was initially challenged by the church because Jesus challenged the very male-dominated patriarchal approach to community. But as the church consolidated power, got in bed with the emperor, it all but abandoned Jesus as wisdom teacher, as personifying a very different spirit. And so let's hear and consider some of his unconventional wisdom. Love your enemies. It's easier for a camel to squeeze through the eye of a needle than it is for a wealthy person to get into God's domain. Or this one never gets old. Can any of you add an hour to your life by fretting about it? And you know, the church's kind of concern about sin Well, surely they didn't have this story front and center. Remember the story of the woman caught in adultery, and all the religious leaders brought her to Jesus. And were going to stone her because that was in the law. And they wanted to trick Jesus into defying the law. And he completely avoided an argument about that law and took the conversation to a place where it stopped everyone in their tracks. Remember what he said? Right. He said, well, whoever among you is without sin, you go ahead and pick up that first stone and throw it at her. Or remember when he talked about the farmer who built more and more barns to hold more and more stuff? But then one night, just like that, he died. And what did all of those barns full of stuff mean? As a wisdom teacher, he had the ability to change the nature of the conversation itself so that people were almost given a different set of eyes. And that's what wisdom does. It has this unique flavor. It isn't like edicts that come from above. It's not thou shalt and thou shalt not. It's meant to provide some tools to create a community that functions well together. And so the wise person builds the house upon the rock. The wise person thinks carefully about what the important components of a life's foundation are. The house of Israel had become very, very law-based, giving it the illusion of security. The church of Christendom followed suit and built itself as well around this priestly tradition, a tradition that was steeped in rules and purity laws, rather than the wisdom tradition. And that's the legacy that we're living with still. A legacy of shame and guilt and exclusion. Within the context of first century Galilee, Jesus was providing an alternative path. I'm not sure he provided an answer to all of life's challenges. He did, however, respond to the challenges of his day. And I think he realized that life was a lesson in progress, and the goal was not so much to keep oneself pure and good, but it was to work towards a universal and humane community. He did not make his claims based on seeing a great deal of the world. He was not a world traveler. He lived in a small backwater county in Judea, but he saw slices of life. He saw the disparity between rich and poor. He saw the limitations of patriarchy. He saw the cruelty of the occupying army. He saw the precarious nature of living off the land or by the sea. He saw the struggle for daily existence. And he commented on these little slices of life based on the wisdom within his own tradition, based on some common sense, and based on his experience of humanity. Other wisdom teachers from other spiritual traditions have come to many of the same conclusions. In his book, One River, Many Wells, Matthew Fox suggests that when we go deeply into the wisdom of our own tradition, we connect with the river that is at the heart of all traditions. Given what is happening in the culture today, given what is happening in the news, given all of the voices and perspectives that come at us daily, it might be a good time to reconnect with the wisdom of our own tradition. One of my favorite definitions of faith is by Anne Lamott. She says, "The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty." I can relate to that perspective. I get really nervous when people, religious people, any people, talk with certainty about anything. Because life itself is uncertain. Jesus spent his days living among people whose lives were uncertain. What he knew to be true was that the life of every individual was completely dependent on a certain set of relationships that would provide a small cushion in the midst of some harsh circumstances. And he also had a hunch that Yahweh, the God in his tradition, was not a powerful being, but a loving being. And on some level, his wisdom was gleaned from a very narrow context. I'm not sure what he would say today to the men and women to whom I listen regularly, who are unhappy in their marriages and just not knowing what to do. I'm not sure what they would say to parents who are confounded by their adolescent daughter's behavior. I'm not sure what he would say to a community wrestling with drug addiction among their youth. I know what he wouldn't say. He wouldn't get all righteous about family values and the way it used to be. Compassion would be at the heart of his comments, and forgiveness, and gentleness. And then he would turn and look around him and make a comment about a blade of grass or a tree or a wildflower. And I have an idea that if we ever wanted to talk to him about our 3-year plan for fixing something, he would just look at us curiously and say, life does not happen in 3-year cycles. It happens now. And that's another part of the wisdom tradition, isn't it? We don't need Jesus to tell us that life is short. Although he did tell us that. He said, life is short, so stop worrying about the things you can't change. Life is short, so why are you putting all your energy into accumulating that stuff? Life is short, so have some fun. Life is short, so look at your priorities and get them straight. Now. Life is short, so forgive yourself and everyone else. Life is short, so love the mystery. Love what is. Do you have a better idea? That's all wisdom from Jesus. So look, during this time for reflection, you're going to see another series of wisdom sayings. I wonder which one of them is for you this day. Which one of them will open your eyes to wonder? Which one of you will drag you out of that winter prison? Which one of them resonates with your soul and your longing for abundant life?